Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jamaica 411. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Michelle Stern. Now, the first thing I want to do is to thank everyone who gave the video a thumbs up. Yes, you did very nicely as usual, and we got the thumbs up that we usually got. And I hope you'll give this one a thumbs up from now on, please, because you don't want to be disturbed later. And I thank you, of course, in advance. So, tonight is part two. And the Auditor General's report gets even more exciting, if I may call it that, because now we're going to be dealing with the private companies and the strange business of 1 minute. The document is signed, or customs document signed by the former CEO. Next minute, it is signed by the present CEO. And you must be wondering what the dickens is going on there. How the former CEO left from November 2022, and yet customs document show up in a 2023, 2024. I talk about say him sign off on declaration and him sign off on customs form when he gone for a long time. That look fishy. No man, something look funny about that. And you would be correct. Question is though, what? So let me not keep you up any longer. Let me get on with it. Now, I do appreciate and very happy to know that you understood a great deal of what it was that I was saying and explaining in the first video in terms of the procurement and the accounting principles that were involved. And you understood it so well that you were quite sure that thieving took place and even accused me of denying that thieving took place. But remember, man, you have to take your time with these things. When you're eating, put a whole heap of food in your mouth one time, you might choke. You have to take your time and go through it. So we're going to go through some more now, except we're going to the Auditor General's report and let her tell us what she found. Yes. Now, when she looked at the procurement needs assessment and planning, I'm going to have to explain to you what several of these terms that she used mean before we can understand fully what it is that she's saying, and then you understand how critical the failure of the UHWI to provide these documents that she spoke of is to the proper running. And for persons who use the facility and you see some things happening at the facility, this would explain the reason why. Now, she began by saying at the top, you see it says systems and practices. Then the next column says criteria, and then her key findings and what it says here, assessment against criteria. So she began by talking about the corporate and operational plans and the criteria, the preparation of corporate and operational plans in keeping with requisite laws and regulations. So laws and regulations require that they should prepare these corporate and operational plans. Now, her key findings when it comes to their preparation of the corporate and operational plans is that the UHWI did not submit formal strategic plans for the period 2018 to 19 all the way through to 2024-2025. Instead, it provided what she called a quinquennial budget, which is a budget over a 5-year period from 2020 to 2025 that included a section on its corporate plan. So it did not include a full bill and receipt, just a portion. However, there is no evidence that this plan informed its procurement strategies. Additionally, UHWI submitted only 3 operational plans for the years 2018 to 2019, then 2022 to 2023, and then 2023 to 2024. So you must be saying to yourself, what did Dickens all them thinking there? Corporate plan and operation plan and procurement plan, and when them don't talk in English. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to look up what all them thinking I mean before we move on. So when it comes to hospital management, what's the importance of having a corporate plan? Well, let's find out. It says corporate plans for a public hospital focused on improving patient care. Interesting. Also, enhancing operational efficiencies, upgrading infrastructure, and implementing modern technology to meet growing diverse community needs. Now, we do know that the UHWI is upgrading some of them facilities, knocking down old building or them proposed to. We know that they are purchasing new equipment, and that's just about what we know. And the government allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to that effect. And if I remember right, the government is either in the process of or has completed digitalizing the hospital records. So these are the areas in a public hospital that needs to be managed. And to manage them effectively, you want to think about it first and then you put it down in writing. And when you lay out these plans that you have in mind for the future in order to improve the hospital care and improve the facilities, this is what you call corporate planning. Follow? Yes. So they went on to explain these strategic plans often include a long-term vision for modernization, such as establishing centers of excellence for specialized care. And they're talking about like cardiology. I suppose like a cardiology department, oncology department, I suppose what they're talking about. Strengthening management competencies by making sure you have the right people employed in the right places and adopting telemedicine. Telemedicine, more or less, is them providing healthcare over the phone, like what happened during COVID in the foreign parts, where you can call in and tell the doctor what's wrong with you, and the doctor, based upon what you say wrong with you, like a diagnosis, or you ask for prescription to be refilled or something to that effect. Yes, that's what I'm talking about there. So, in fact, anything to do with any changes that is going to take place in the hospital or the vision that they would like to have take place in the hospital to modernize it, to improve healthcare to the patients. That is what is called corporate planning. And what the Auditor General said that she found was there were no written corporate plans. They were making decisions, evidently making decisions at the board level and then implementing through the CEO, but there were no written plans as to the direction in which the hospital is going. But that is what the corporate plan is supposed to do. They are going along like a rudderless ship, hoping that they will reach the destination. So what now is the operational plan? It says here that operational plans for a public hospital outline specific short-term actions, resources, and timelines, usually 1 to 3 years, to achieve the strategic goals, the corporate plan. Remember, they refer to it as strategic planning. Yes. To achieve strategic goals like improved patient care, efficiency, and sustainability. And of course, they have key components. So the corporate plan establishes what it is you want to accomplish in the long run in terms of patient care and facilities management. That's the long and short of it. Your operational plan now is what you're going to use to implement your corporate plan. You follow? So you come up now with ideas as to how you're going to go about improving patient care. What is the problem that you're having with patient care? You're having a problem with beds, so maybe you need more wards. If you're having a flood of people coming in, more people using up the services. They're not going to clinic, they're not trust clinic, then trust you, or you them a come to. So you have to do something about that. So that now would be a corporate plan, and then they will have an operational plan as to how to bring it into being. You follow? Yes, so that's now what the Auditor General is reporting on. They are like a rudderless ship, just floating along without any direction. And some of the woes you're hearing at the hospital may well be because there is no planning, no forward planning. So, how then are they managing the university hospital? They are being reactionary. As a problem develops, they react to it. You follow? But there is no long-term plan as to how to deal with the problem so you can fix it once and for all. And so as soon as I get these plans written down and operational plan as to how to bring it about, hopefully we will see improvements at the University Hospital. Patient care. And we must not forget the staff, overworked because of the amount of persons that are descending on the facilities. The next term you heard the Auditor General using is procurement plans. It says here procurement plans for a public hospital involve a strategic, regulated process to acquire medical supplies, equipment, and services while ensuring budget compliance, quality, and efficiency. The first thing you need to know before you even start your procurement planning is what it is you want to buy. And then you have a process. Usually is about the specs, the specification of what it is you want. So if you want a particular equipment, like when they were buying the neurological drill, they determine the components. And this drill has so many different parts to do so many different surgeries. They determine which surgeries they want it done. They determine they want spinal cord surgery, brain surgery, I believe facial surgery, and so on. And once they determine what service they want to offer, then they get the attachments for that neurosurgical drill. So anything you need in the public hospital that requires the spending of money, whether you're going to be purchasing supplies or equipment, or you'll be hiring services, that goes into procurement planning. Once the entity prepares its corporate plan, operational plan, and procurement plan, they then go to the board for approval. Once it's approved, then the CEO will get to work as the budget becomes available. Follow? Yes. There's another term that we're going to be encountering in this report, what she calls needs assessment. And for a public hospital, needs assessment is referring to systematic process, often required every 3 years, that analyzes community health data, service utilization, and stakeholder input to identify health disparities and prioritize resource allocation. So the first thing that they do in the needs assessment is look at the community. For the University Hospital of the West Indies, the community is literally Jamaica, right? But the immediate community would be Kingston and St. Andrew. I do believe to take patients from outside, they may need referral. Not sure, but if not, then it will be Kingston, St. Andrew, parts of St. Catherine, St. Thomas, and so on. Then there's a matter of pharmaceutical needs. If you have more patients, you're going to need more medication, and so on and so forth. So whatever it is that is involved in patient care or facilities management, you're going to have to do an assessment of what you need. So now that we have an understanding of these terms, let's get down to business. So the Auditor General in her report is speaking about here the University Hospital of the West Indies procurement methodologies. And these are the procedures that are permitted under the law. You have several methodologies. The one that is preferred by government, and we too, is the competitive bidding. So you have the international competitive bidding, national competitive bidding, and after that you have the restricted bidding, direct contracting, and emergency procurements. Of these 5 procurement methodologies, the least competitive one is a direct contracting procurement, because you're going directly to a supplier and asking them for a quotation. And so it is anticipated that that particular procurement method will give us the least value for money. And the ones that in theory should give us the best value for money would be the competitive biddings. The most desirable procurement methodology is competitive bidding, goes without saying. However, if there's an emergency, the entity can source the goods or the service based on an emergency procurement procedure. Then there are instances when it may be necessary for them to deal with one contractor, and that is the direct contracting procurement, and then you have the restricted bidding. That methodology is usually used when there are a limited number of persons supplying that good or service. So, for those procurement methodologies, there are restrictions on how and when it can be used. So, what the Auditor General does whenever she goes into an entity looking at the procurement methodology, she's looking for which of the methodologies they use and whether or not they use them according to law. You follow? Yes. So, in looking at the University Hospital of the West Indies, she found much to be alarmed about. It says here that they used the direct contracting methodology 64% of the time in 2024 and the first quarter of 2025. And the remaining contracts over the same period, the methodology that they used was restricted bidding. It does not appear as though they put even one contract to competitive bidding. Now, they gave an explanation from the hospital. It says at 3.8, the management response noted that preliminary internal review indicates that these documentation gaps stem from fragmented record keeping systems across departments, suggesting perhaps that they should have been centralized, inconsistent application of procurement procedures for CEO approved contracts, and limited operationalization of the evaluation and procurement committees during the period under review. Who was monitoring what was going on at UHWI? The UHWI management said that there were inconsistent application of procurement procedures for CEO approved contracts. There were contracts that are approved by them and contracts that are approved by the CEO, and they describe the CEO approved contracts as inconsistent application of the procurement procedures. So let us now take a closer look to see what it is they're talking about and if it was as bad as they make out. The heading UHWI frequently award contracts without following proper procurement procedures. And she's going to tell us now what she's talking about. It says as 3.9 from UHWI's purchase orders, because they would generally follow the accounting rules, it is best to check there. So that will tell you now all that went through the system to payment. You follow? So even if they had shown her a bunch of procurement documentation, she would still have to go to those purchase orders to see if any slipped by. And that's exactly what she did. So when she examined the purchase orders, we identified suppliers for goods and works with values exceeding $3 million. We requested all contracts related to these suppliers for the period from April 2019 to March 2025. So she asked for all the contracts that were valued over $3 million, all of them. And she said here, subsequently, we asked for procurement records, contract documentation, payment records, and project management files for a sample of 111 contracts. So she would have gotten many, many contracts. She took a sample of 111 because she won't be able to audit everything. However, UHWI did not provide procurement documentation for 51 contracts, totaling approximately $521 million for various projects shown in Appendix 1. 50 of the 51 contracts with values of up to $30 million required approval solely from the CEO. One person's signature is on that approval to spend $30 million of our taxpayers' money. No, it is saying that that is in accordance with the established approval threshold. So it was the board who set that threshold, it seems. Although we found no documentation indicating that these procurement activities were evaluated by the evaluation committee or reviewed by the procurement committee, the contracts were signed by the CEO, effectively committing the UHWI to these expenditures without the necessary internal oversight. Him won. And the board, which is the body that was given the authority and the powers and duties to manage and control the operations of the hospital. What were they doing? It is their powers that he's exercising, right? And he was exercising their powers without proper procurement procedures being followed. This is what the Auditor General is reporting. He's signing contracts for $30 million. That's supposed to go through an evaluation committee and a procurement committee. And the Auditor General is reporting here that no such documentation from these entities were presented to her. Now, let us make it quite clear. Remember that the period for the 111 contracts spanned from April 2019 to 2025. And remember, the present CEO took over from November 2022 when he was acting until he was appointed to the position of CEO in June of 2024. And the Auditor General did not state of the 50 contracts that were signed by the CEO, which period they were coming from, whether some were coming from the previous regime or some were coming from this particular regime with this particular CEO, or all of them were coming from then or now. So we don't know for sure. But let us continue. Hopefully at some point it will become clear. The Auditor General's report went on to say, further, UHWI provided no evidence that the other contract, valuing over $51 million, was submitted to the then National Contracts Commission for approval. These irregularities further highlighted the weaknesses in UHWI's procurement practices. So the other contract, there were 51, 50 signed by the CEO, which meant that the other contract was either signed by the committee or the board. And in that case, it appears from what she's saying that that particular contract for that value should have been sent to the National Contracts Commission for approval, and she saw no evidence that it was. So that would then be a breach if that is the case. So this is Appendix 1, mentioned in the report. And this is where you'll find a list of the 51 contracts that were issued apparently without proper procedures, procurement procedures being followed. Numbers were assigned to the companies, and there's a mention of what was supplied and the value. And all of those 51 contracts were issued to these 12 contractors, a private company, and a consultant, right? And the total of the transactions, of course, is $521 million. And I want you to remember that these 51 contracts were coming from a sample size of 111. That's about 45% of the contracts that they had put aside and said, we're going to check these out. 45% of them, the Auditor General is reporting, did not follow proper procurement procedures. There was an absence, she said, of supporting documentation, and that provided evidence that it did not apparently follow the procurement procedures prescribed by the law. The Auditor General is saying here that the absence of these supporting documentation to prove that the procurement procedures were followed when awarding these contracts pose significant risks to transparency, accountability, and the achievement of value for money. That is what the procurement policy and the procedures are about, to ensure as much as we're able to that we are getting value for money. The absence of the procurement documentation also hampered our ability to verify compliance with established guidelines. Specifically, We were unable to review essential documentation such as requisitions and recommendations from evaluation and procurement committees. There was no evidence of the methodology employed or the tender evaluation process used for selecting contractors, which limits our capacity to assess the transparency and fairness of the contract award process. And then she went on to evaluate what it was that the management response had said, that the reason for the documentation gaps was because the record keeping of the departments were fragmented. In other words, each department that requests something to be purchased, they apparently, according to him, kept the record. So there was no central place in which the procurement documentations were kept. Then process, it seems, was scatter scatter. But they are promising to fix that. Now, she says here the UHWI also outlined a series of corrective actions that were aimed at strengthening procurement compliance and oversight. These included commissioning a retrospective audit of 43 flagged contracts. So, of the 51, apparently 43 they need to go investigate, is what she's saying here. And they should particularly focus on 41 awarded to 4 suppliers to verify the scope, what the job was about, the payments that were made, and the procurement methodology that was employed. A standardized procurement documentation protocol was to be implemented. That's what them said them are going to do. Mandating centralized digital archiving and CEO sign off only after committee review. Finally, so the CEO will no longer be able to sign on his own. Any contract that he has the power to sign off on has now to go before the committee for review. And only after they review the contracts, he can sign off on them. That is how it should have been in the first place. So now they're telling the Auditor General what it is they plan to do to correct the situation, right? And subjecting the CEO's contracts that he should sign off on to review by the committee was one such step. Additionally, to improve the governance, they are going to establish a monthly procurement oversight tracker. And it is the internal auditor who is going to be responsible for monitoring that. So finally, they're putting in internal controls. Then, any contract that is going to be signed by the CEO that is over $3 million, there has to be 2 signatures on those contracts. And of course, they said they're going to have a mandatory refresher training for procurement staff on the Government of Jamaica guidelines so they know what they're supposed to do and they not get themselves in unnecessary problem. Yes. So these changes they're proposing is supposed to resolve some of the issues that were identified up to this point. However, at the final paragraph, the Auditor General is reporting that to date, no documentation has been provided to confirm the status of implementation of the corrective actions. So far, them said them going to do it, but them not send her no proof that they even started implementing. Now, we've come to the end of that segment of the Auditor General's report, and we are now going to get into the juicy bit. We started it in the last video, improper use of UHWI's tax exemption status, and we sound off upon it, particularly the idea that they had given the benefit, in addition to the duty-free benefit that the companies got, they actually gave a benefit of $1.9 million that they paid in customs fees because it come through for them name. And then look like them not go collect back the money. So it seems. So they need to go and check to see if they had gotten a check from the company for the $1.9 million. If not, they need to go for it. Now, I'm sure you hear by now about the UHWI using its tax exempt status to benefit private companies. 4 of them. They got away with not paying customs duty to the tune of 23 million. And that is, I would suggest, the tip of the iceberg, because it was only 20 out of the 2,991 customs entry that the Auditor General checked, and 8 out of the 20 showed irregularities. And in this case, we're talking about companies 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what you're seeing here for company 1, you see where it says suppliers invoice, import entry, and then you have the declared owner and declaration signed by. Now, in the declaration signed by column, you see that for the first import for company 1, which was done December 28, 2023, it has the former CEO as having his signature on the C-84, as well as the letter from the University Hospital of the West Indies making a declaration that the items that are in the C-84 is for their own use. And they claim that is the former CEO signed it, except he had left from November of 2022, more than 1 year before. So I know you notice it, and you must be wondering how come? How is it that his name is on this document and him left there more than 1 year? So the second time Company 1 used the UHWI duty-free status was May 21, 2024. This was their second importation. And in this one, it did not mention the former CEO's name. It did say, though, that the private wing, which is the 28th wing we established, they were listed on the import declaration document as the importer and consignee, with the CEO of the UHWI as the person responsible for the financial settlement. Him go pay the bill. And the bill lading, though, named the UHWI as the consignee when it did done name the 28th wing. So a whole heap of mistakes were made on these entries, and that would be either the system is cockeyed or the broker was making a lot of mistakes. How it is that the system didn't pick it up, I don't know, but that is how it is. Well, it looked like the company 1 had some godfather in the UHWI, because it was 3 times they were allowed to use the duty-free status to bring in goods for them own self and not for the UHWI, and benefited from some free duty they didn't have to pay, and GCT. So here we are again, this time December 12, 2024. So there were 2 transactions in 2024, one in 2023. And this time in December 2024, 2 years after the former CEO left, in name called up on the document. It says here that the Customs C-84 declaration dated December 3, 2024 bore the name of the current CEO and stamped with the signature of the former CEO. So we need now to reconcile these discrepancies if we can. And for that, we're going to have to do a little research. What do you say to that? You agree? Yes. So for us to be able to understand what could be happening here, whether this is fraud we're looking at, or a cockeyed system at customs, or was it the former CEO indeed signing off on these things when he's not there? Or did somebody somehow get hold of his credentials and were using it for some reason? So let's take a look at the customs clearance system to see if somehow that will provide us with some explanation as to what is going on here. Since around 2016, the Customs Department introduced a system it calls ASICUDA. And what does that mean? It means Automated System for Customs Data. That is what the acronym ASICUDA means. So it is an electronic system, a paperless system. And what we have done is moved away from this business of writing up forms and going into customs. It's now done online. That's basically it. So how it works basically, for companies or individuals who are importing or exporting, they would go on the jamaicacustoms.gov.jm website, and they would apply for access to ASICUDA. And there are some things that you need to do. You fill out a form giving information about the company and so on. And then there's a signature form that you download. On that signature form, you're going to put your manual signature and your company stamp, upload it again, and then you wait until they do some investigation. Everybody's name that is on the form that is going to be doing business on your behalf, if it's your employee, they're going to look into them background, make sure so them all right, because you know customs is a serious thing when we're talking about imports and exports. Yes, we don't want certain things to come in and we don't want certain things to go out. So that is the process for applying. Once they do their investigations, they then send the application through this system. It has several steps where they're going to now determine whether or not you meet the criteria for being on this website. And if you do, they'll notify you as such. And I think the main thing is your background, that background check. Now, for the persons who are employed to the company, each employee will be given their own login and they set their password accordingly. They are not supposed to share either the login or the password with anybody. It's supposed to be a secret, just like how you have your bank card with your PIN number you wanted to keep a secret. Yes, it's supposed to be a secret. Nobody is supposed to have your credentials because if they do, they may enter the site, and because they're not authorized to do so, clearly they will be there illegally, and I'm sure there must be trouble in that. So now we come to the former CEO. He left the UHWI in 2022, November 1, and yet his credentials are appearing on customs form to clear goods at the wharf. And the question is, how come? Now remember, the clearance is being done by the private wing, not the UHWI. Is it possible that the former CEO is now over by the private wing? It is possible, but somehow I doubt it because then the Auditor General would have said so, right? So again, we come to the troubling question. How is it that his name is on the customs form when he's not supposed to be? Because he's not working with the company anymore. Let me tell you what I think is going on. Here is the ASICUDA system further explaining how it works. It says commercial goods must be cleared using the electronic single administrative document, ESAD, on the automated system for customs data, which is ASICUDA. If a customs broker is required, then all documents must be presented to the broker who will complete the clearance process. So the broker is to get all of the documents. Heard that? Now, the law says that if you're bringing in items that are less than 5,000 US dollars, you do not have to use a broker. But if you are bringing in items that have a total value over 5,000 US dollars, you must use a customs broker. You must use the services of a customs broker. You can't just bring it in so by yourself. In the case of these four companies, all the invoices that were submitted, they had values over 5,000 US, so they were using custom brokers. Now it goes on to say, when the service of a custom broker or local agent is used, the C73 form must be completed by the importer, and the form processing fee of 5,000 Jamaican dollars paid to the Jamaica Customs Agency, right? So if you're going to have somebody representing you, then you are going to have to inform customs to that effect. And to do so, you do a C73 form and submit it. And then that person now will be able to clear your goods at the wharf on your behalf. You get that? Yes. At 4, it says, if a company employee or person so authorized by the company is used to effect clearance a letter of authorization from the company must be provided as well as a valid company ID. So that is the process when a broker, customs broker, or an employee is clearing goods at the customs on behalf of the company or your behalf. So now that you've hired your broker, it's now time to clear goods through the customs. And here is the procedure for doing so. So your broker now is going to prepare a customs declaration, IM4, in ASYCUDA. So it's on the system that he is making preparing the declaration form in the system itself. Now it says all supporting documents are to be uploaded. All supporting documents, and it gives you the example: invoices, permits, licenses, bill of lading, etc. They must be uploaded to the system. So when the broker goes in, he's going to prepare the IM4 form. That is what is going to be before him. He's going to fill the information out and then complete the process by uploading all documents in his possession. So he's going to have the invoice from the supplier. He's going to have the bill of lading. If he needed permits or licenses, then those as well. And in the case of the UHWI, the declaration letter from UHWI, which is telling customs that these goods that is being cleared is for our use, and therefore remember, we don't pay customs duty and we don't pay GCT. It's zero rated. And then the customs will duly note that with the letter and do their research, found that is true, and then they won't charge them any duty. They will charge them the other expenses. And I do believe they say they only pay half. Government entities pay half, right, of the expenses. So that is the process. So here is what I think is going on. You know how Jamaican people stay. I am prepared to bet you that the customs broker has pre-signed declaration letters from the UHWI, from the two persons who are authorized to prepare those declaration letters on its behalf: the former CEO and the current CEO. They must be the ones who were authorized to do so on behalf of UHWI, nobody else. If I am right, then all that is happening is that the broker, when he's putting the information in and uploading the document, he may not be as careful as he should be and probably uploading the wrong one. You understand what I'm saying? Because the current CEO has his own login and his own passwords, and so did the former CEO. The other explanation is that somebody has the former CEO's credentials and we're using it in the system. The question is, the broker supposed to know that the former CEO not there anymore. So for him to be uploading the former CEO's declaration letter that he signed and stamped in the system, that must be cause for concern, because that now is a false declaration. When the investigation starts, they will find out for sure what went down, and that broker probably going to get himself into trouble either way. And what may confirm my suspicion is the fact that these letters were undated. Did you notice how often the Auditor General said that the letters were undated? Yes, he was given undated letters to save time to upload into the system whenever he's clearing something on behalf of the UHWI. That's what I believe happened. And he got the papers then mixed up. And not only did he get the papers mixed up, but unless we are to believe that the ASYCUDA system is very bad and confusing or has gone cockeyed, you will notice that the customs entry C84 form information differs from what is on the bill of lading. Of course, what is on the bill of lading is the important thing. What is on the C84 form is what the broker put in the system. So if it differs, if it says that the importer is the Tony Thwaites wing, and then the C84 says that the importer is the UHWI, that's a broker who made a mistake. So chances are he was the one that was making the mistake by putting in the wrong declaration letter. See what I'm saying? Yes. And just for the doubting Thomases, remember it is the broker that is handling the documents, not anybody else. So the only person who could have input the wrong information into the system has to be the broker. Yes. Well, folks, that's it for me today. I want to thank you all so very much for joining me and for sharing, for liking, and subscribing and leaving your comments in the comment section. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves and walk good. And I think I should tell you from now, look out for part 3 because there's more.